The Storm Prediction Center does not use the words high risk lightly. It is the single most serious category the agency has, reserved for only a handful of days across an entire year, issued only when forecasters have genuinely high confidence that a major, potentially historic, severe weather outbreak is about to unfold. This week, that exact designation went up on the map, stretched across a corridor running from Texas through Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa. At the center of a 4-day storm system, meteorologists are calling one of the most widespread and impactful severe weather outbreaks the country has seen so far this year. Millions of people across the Gulf Coast, the Plains, and the Great Lakes are sitting directly inside the path of this system right now. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what is fueling this outbreak, why the high-risk label matters so much more than a routine severe thunderstorm watch, and which specific cities are facing the most serious threat as this system moves through. If tracking real, current severe weather coverage, not just the scary graphic on your phone, is something you want to keep doing, subscribing means you catch every update the moment new information comes in. Let's start with what actually makes this outbreak different from an ordinary summer storm system, because the setup behind it is genuinely unusual. According to AccuWeather's senior meteorologist Courtney Travis, the atmospheric setup driving the system is particularly volatile, built on a combination of 3 specific ingredients working together at the same time. Unusually strong high-altitude winds, a surge of deep moisture streaming north out of the Gulf of Mexico, and sharp temperature differences colliding along the same frontal boundary. Each of those 3 ingredients plays a distinct role in how dangerous a severe weather outbreak actually becomes. The strong winds aloft, what meteorologists call wind shear, provide the twisting, rotational energy that can turn an ordinary thunderstorm into a rotating supercell capable of producing tornadoes. The surging Gulf moisture supplies the raw fuel, the humidity and instability that allows storms to grow explosively tall and powerful once they start developing. And the sharp temperature contrast along the boundary between air masses acts as the trigger, the lifting mechanism that actually gets storms firing in the first place, concentrated tightly along that specific line where warm, humid air collides with cooler, drier air pushing in from the other direction. When all 3 of those ingredients line up simultaneously across the same stretch of the country, meteorologists start using words like historic, because that combination does not come together very often, and when it does, the results can be genuinely destructive. Think of it like assembling a campfire. Dry kindling alone will not produce much of a fire without a spark, and a spark alone will not sustain anything without fuel to burn. A truly dangerous, severe weather outbreak requires all 3 of its own ingredients present at once, in the right proportions, in the same place at the same time. Wind shear without adequate moisture produces rotation with nothing to actually organize into a storm. Deep moisture without a lifting mechanism can sit stagnant for days without ever triggering explosive storm development. A sharp temperature boundary without either of the other 2 ingredients might only produce a brief, disorganized line of showers. It is the rare alignment of all 3 factors simultaneously, exactly what forecasters identified building across this corridor this week, that turns an ordinary storm system into the kind of setup capable of justifying the Storm Prediction Center's highest warning level. This particular system began unfolding on Monday and is expected to persist through late Thursday night, sweeping across a massive corridor stretching from the Gulf Coast all the way up into the Great Lakes region. Forecasters issued their highest priority warning, the high-risk designation, specifically for Tuesday, covering parts of Texas, Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa. To understand exactly how significant that specific label is, it helps to understand the full scale the Storm Prediction Center actually uses. Convective outlooks run from marginal, the lowest tier, up through slight, enhanced, and moderate, before finally reaching high, the top of the scale. High-risk days are issued only a handful of times in an entire year, specifically because the ingredients required to justify that level of confidence, a major tornado outbreak or a long-lived hurricane-force wind event called a derecho, do not align this precisely very often. Forecasters do not issue this warning lightly, and when they do, it reflects genuine high-confidence concern that this specific day could produce some of the most significant severe weather the region sees all year. Each step up that 5-tier scale represents a meaningful jump in forecaster confidence, not simply a slightly scarier label. A marginal risk suggests isolated severe weather is possible, but not expected to be widespread. A slight risk, the category most severe weather days across the country actually fall into, suggests scattered severe storms are likely somewhere within the outlined area. Enhanced and moderate risks each represent a step toward greater coverage and greater confidence that a genuinely significant, organized severe weather event will occur, not just isolated storms here and there. High risk sits at the very top, reserved specifically for days when forecasters have enough confidence in both the ingredients and the timing to expect a major, potentially historic outbreak, the kind of day that ends up referenced in weather records for years afterward. Because that combination of factors is genuinely difficult to achieve, some years pass with only 1 or 2 high-risk days issued nationwide, which is exactly why seeing this designation applied to a single Tuesday carries so much weight among meteorologists tracking this system closely. The reach of this storm system is genuinely enormous. Major metropolitan areas sitting directly inside the danger zone include Dallas, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, Chicago, and Indianapolis, meaning millions of people across several different states are facing the same underlying threat within the same stretch of days. Forecasters have warned residents to expect wind gusts reaching up to 70 miles per hour, strong enough to snap tree limbs, down power lines, and cause structural damage to weaker buildings on their own, even setting aside the additional threat of tornadoes and large hail layered on top of that wind risk. Significant flash flooding is also a serious concern across the corridor, since the same deep Gulf moisture fueling the severe thunderstorm threat can also produce extremely heavy rainfall rates when storms train repeatedly over the same areas. Large hail is another hazard worth understanding on its own terms during an outbreak this volatile, since it forms through a genuinely violent internal process inside the strongest storms. Powerful updrafts within a supercell can carry small ice particles repeatedly up through the storm's coldest layers, where each pass adds another layer of ice, similar in principle to how a pearl gradually forms layer by layer. The stronger and more sustained a storm's internal updraft, the longer a hailstone can stay suspended inside that cycle, before finally growing too heavy for the updraft to support it any longer and falling to the ground. That is precisely why the strongest, most organized supercells, the same storms capable of producing significant tornadoes, are frequently the same storms capable of producing the largest, most damaging hail, since both hazards trace back to the same underlying storm intensity rather than being unrelated coincidences occurring in the same system. Since it is a genuinely different kind of hazard than the tornado risk most people think of first during a severe weather outbreak. Rather than a single, narrow, rotating column of wind touching down and lifting again within minutes, a derecho is a long-lived line of thunderstorms capable of producing widespread, hurricane-force straight-line wind damage along a path stretching for hundreds of miles, sometimes lasting the better part of a full day as it tracks across multiple states. The damage a derecho leaves behind can resemble the aftermath of a hurricane making landfall far inland, snapped trees, downed power lines, and structural damage spread across an enormous continuous swath, rather than the narrower, more concentrated damage path a tornado typically carves. Both hazards, a major tornado outbreak and a derecho, sit within the same category of event capable of justifying a high-risk designation, which is part of why forecasters watching this specific system have been tracking both possibilities closely rather than assuming only one type of severe weather is actually in play, and why residents across the outlined corridor have been urged to prepare for the full range of hazards rather than fixating on just one. One region deserves particular attention as the system moves through, because of just how vulnerable it already is heading into this specific threat. Texas Hill Country, an area directly inside Tuesday's high-risk zone, is still recovering from catastrophic flooding that struck the region last summer, a disaster that reshaped how seriously both residents and emergency officials in the area treat flash flood warnings. A region already working through the long, difficult recovery from one major flood event now faces a fresh flash flooding threat from an entirely new storm system, a genuinely difficult reality for communities that have not had much time to fully rebuild before facing this kind of risk again. Recovery from a catastrophic flood is rarely a quick process, and the vulnerabilities it leaves behind are not always visible from the surface. Damaged infrastructure, weakened drainage systems, and debris still settling in waterways can all make a community measurably more susceptible to flash flooding from a subsequent storm than it would have been before the original disaster struck, even if the new storm produces a similar amount of rainfall. Residents who lived through last summer's flooding are also carrying a very real psychological weight into this new threat, since research on disaster recovery consistently shows that communities facing a second major event before fully recovering from the first often experience heightened anxiety and stress, even when the new threat is being met with more preparation and more institutional knowledge than the original disaster had available. It helps to understand this outbreak within the broader context of just how active the 2026 severe weather season has already been across exactly the same stretch of the country. In Illinois specifically, the preliminary tornado count for 2026 had already reached 221 confirmed reports by the end of July, compared to a finalized total of 147 for all of 2025, a year that itself was already the state's most active tornado year since 1950. Indiana had already tied and then broken its own tornado record for the year, with 79 confirmed tornadoes surpassing the previous record set back in 2011. Wisconsin recorded 51 tornado reports by the same point in the year, its most active stretch since 2011 as well. This week's outbreak is not an isolated event striking a region that rarely sees severe weather, It is landing directly on top of one of the most active tornado seasons this specific part of the country has documented in more than a decade, meaning emergency responders, storm spotters, and residents alike are already stretched from responding to an unusually high volume of severe weather events even before this specific system arrived. Part of what has driven this unusual concentration of activity into states like Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin is a broader shift away from the historical pattern most people associate with a tornado risk in the United States. Traditionally, by the end of July, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, the stretch of the country long nicknamed Tornado Alley would sit at the top of the national tornado count. This year has bucked that historical pattern almost entirely, with Texas tornado activity running notably below its usual pace, while states further north and east have taken over as the most active tornado zones in the country. Meteorologists tracking this shift describe it as part of a broader, still developing pattern rather than a single anomalous season, one that has forced emergency management agencies across the Midwest and parts of the traditionally quieter East to treat severe weather preparedness with a level of urgency historically reserved for the Plains states alone. The timeline of this outbreak matters for anyone trying to track it day by day. Tuesday represented the peak of the immediate danger, with the high-risk designation specifically covering the Texas through Iowa corridor. As the system continued moving through the following days, the most active severe weather threat shifted eastward, with forecasters tracking continued storm chances and a somewhat lower, though still meaningful, risk level, extending into communities like the Quad Cities region along the Illinois and Iowa border by midweek. Even as the tornado and severe wind threat gradually eased in some areas as the system progressed, the flash flooding danger remained a serious ongoing concern, with forecasters specifically flagging the Ozark Mountains region of Missouri and Arkansas as a trouble spot where slow-moving or repeating storms could produce dangerous flash flooding even after the more dramatic tornado threat had passed through. That kind of extended multi-day threat window is part of what makes an outbreak like this one so difficult to communicate clearly to the public, since the specific hazard shifts meaningfully from day to day even while the overall system technically remains active the entire time. A resident checking the forecast only on Tuesday, seeing the high-risk designation, and then assuming the danger has passed once Wednesday arrives without a repeat of that same top-tier warning could easily underestimate the very real flash flooding risk still building in a different part of the same broader system. Forecasters have specifically emphasized tracking this system day by day, rather than treating a single day's warning level as the full picture of the entire event's duration. Understanding exactly what each watch and warning actually means could make a genuine difference if you find yourself in this system's path over the coming days. A severe thunderstorm or tornado watch means conditions are favorable for dangerous weather to develop. A signal to stay alert, review your safety plan, and keep a way to receive emergency alerts close at hand. A warning is a different, far more urgent message entirely, meaning a dangerous storm or tornado has actually been detected, either by radar or a trained spotter, and you need to take protective action immediately rather than waiting to see what happens. It also helps to understand who actually issues each of these products and how that information travels to you in practice. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, handles the broader outlooks, the marginal through high-risk categories, covering multi-state regions days in advance, giving emergency managers and the public general advance notice of where the greatest danger is expected to develop. Local National Weather Service offices then handle the specific real-time watches and warnings for their own coverage areas once storms actually begin forming, using live radar data and, when available, reports from trained storm spotters on the ground to confirm exactly when and where a tornado or severe thunderstorm has actually developed. That two-tier system, a national outlook combined with hyper-local real-time warnings, is what allows a single high-risk designation covering 4 states to still translate into specific, actionable warnings for individual counties and communities once the actual storms arrive. During an outbreak carrying a high-risk designation specifically, the gap between watch and warning can close extremely fast, since the same atmospheric conditions capable of producing one dangerous storm are frequently capable of producing several more in rapid succession across the same general area. That distinction becomes especially important to understand once storms actually begin forming, since a high-risk day rarely produces just a single dangerous storm cell moving quietly through one community. Instead, the same volatile combination of wind shear, moisture, and lift capable of justifying a high-risk designation in the first place tends to produce multiple discrete supercells, each capable of independently producing its own tornado, hail, and damaging wind, tracking across the outlined region over the course of several hours, rather than one storm passing through and the danger being over. Residents in the highlighted zone should be prepared for the possibility of multiple separate warnings throughout the day and into the evening, rather than assuming that surviving one storm cell passing nearby means the overall threat for that day has ended. If you live anywhere within the system's path over the coming days, here is what is actually worth doing right now. Identify the safest room in your home, an interior space on the lowest floor, away from windows, and make sure every member of your household knows exactly where to go the moment a tornado warning is issued. Keep multiple ways to receive emergency alerts active, a weather radio, phone notifications, and local news, since power outages during a severe outbreak can knock out any single method of receiving warnings without much notice. If you live in a flood-prone area, particularly anywhere near the Ozarks or Texas Hill Country specifically, never attempt to drive through a flooded roadway, since it takes surprisingly little moving water to sweep a vehicle off the road. And flash flooding during an event like this one can develop far faster than many drivers expect. Secure or bring inside anything in your yard capable of becoming a projectile in 70-mile-per-hour winds, and charge your phone and any backup battery packs now, before the worst of the system actually arrives, rather than waiting until a warning is already in effect. If you have family members, particularly elderly relatives, or anyone with mobility limitations, living alone anywhere within this outbreak's path, check in with them directly now, rather than assuming they have seen the same forecast you have. Confirm they know where their safe room is, that they have a working way to receive emergency alerts, and that they have a plan for reaching shelter quickly if a warning is issued while they are alone. Severe weather outbreaks of this scale disproportionately put people who live alone, have limited mobility, or lack reliable access to warning systems at the greatest risk, precisely because the speed at which a high-risk day can escalate from a routine forecast to an active, life-threatening warning leaves very little room for anyone to improvise a plan after the fact. This week's storm system is a genuine reminder that severe weather season does not follow a simple, predictable calendar, and that some of the most dangerous outbreaks of an entire year can arrive well outside the stretch most people associate with peak tornado risk. A high-risk designation from the Storm Prediction Center is not issued for an ordinary Tuesday. It reflects real, high-confidence concern from meteorologists who do not reach for that specific warning level often. Millions of people across Texas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, and the surrounding region are sitting directly inside a system forecasters are already calling one of the most significant of the entire year, arriving on top of a season that had already broken tornado records across multiple states before this outbreak even began. That combination, a genuinely rare warning level layered on top of an already record-setting season, is exactly why this particular storm system deserves more attention than a routine weather alert scrolling past on a phone screen. Severe weather outbreaks capable of justifying a high-risk designation do not arrive on a predictable schedule, and they do not wait for a season or a community to finish recovering from whatever came before them. The most reliable protection available to anyone in this system's path is not hoping the forecast turns out to be overstated. It is treating a warning of this seriousness with the seriousness it was actually issued with. We will keep tracking this system and the broader severe weather pattern behind it as new watches, warnings, and storm reports come in, since a system this large rarely finishes producing news in a single afternoon. If you want those updates the moment they land, subscribing is the way to make sure you do not miss them. And if you are anywhere inside this outbreak's path, tell us in the comments what conditions have actually looked like where you are, because real-time ground-level reports are often the fastest way. Anyone learns what a storm is actually doing before the official reports catch up, sometimes minutes before the next warning is even issued, and sometimes long before any news crew has managed to reach the same street you're already standing on. Stay safe, and we will see you in the next one.